Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Overtime. We have two stories for you today. The second one is really quite staggering, so we're going to get into the first one because it dovetails into the second. Articles of impeachment have been dropped, two articles against RFK Jr. This was done by Michigan Democrat 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴𝐶, who has also introduced previously two articles of impeachment against Pete Hegseth. We talked about the impeachment process when those were dropped against Hegseth. We talked about how and why. We will bring up the Hegseth impeachment in just a minute. We're not going to revisit what impeachment is, how and why it works. There is a history there. It's probably worth understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean removal from office. It just means to have a trial. This is how and why it works. We've covered that before. I'm sure we'll do it again. We won't do it today. Having said that, what we are going to talk about, in the RFK impeachment articles, RFK Jr. has got to go, Stevens said. Today I've introduced articles of impeachment to remove him from office. RFK Jr. has turned his back on science, on public health, and on the American people. Under his watch, families are less safe, healthcare costs are skyrocketing, and life-saving research, including right here in Michigan, is being gutted. RFK Jr. is the biggest self-created threat to our health and safety. I cannot and will not stand by while one man dismantles decades of medical progress. Enough is enough, and that is why I am pushing to impeach RFK Jr. to hold him accountable and to protect the health and safety of and future of every Michigander, because our health, our science, and our future is worth fighting for. At least one Republican, John Bassaro from Wyoming, has said, quote, "I am a doctor. Vaccines work. Secretary Kennedy, in your confirmation hearings, you promised to uphold the highest standards for vaccines. Since then, I've grown deeply concerned." Not as overwhelming the support as I'd like to see, but gives you some hope. So, a number of Americans do not know or realize that you can actually impeach any federal employee. So we've talked about this before. Again, you can impeach, for example, your postman. You can impeach anybody at the judiciary, from the Supreme Court to any federal court. You can impeach anybody who works for the federal government. Obviously, impeachments usually are reserved for the president. That's what people think about it for. But you can impeach members of his cabinet. You can, and we have impeached members of Congress before. Matt Gaetz was facing impeachment before he just resigned for obvious reasons. So now here's what I'd like to do. I do see that. Thank you, Titan. I'm trying to get that up and having an issue with it. We'll take a look at that in a second. Yeah, that's okay. So that's, we have a third breaking news. It looks like the U.S. has seized a sanctioned oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. That is as of, I think, 2 hours ago. So we're gonna look into that. Okay, so we'll thank you, Titan. Wow. I said yesterday this was going to be a busy day. So, the Newsweek is reporting that they expect, because Republicans hold a majority in the House and Senate, both the impeachments of Hegseth and RFK Jr. are unlikely to go through. I am not as pessimistic about it, and I will explain why in a minute. For Hegseth, the articles of impeachment included for what has been called Signalgate, where even by the Pentagon's own standards and a Pentagon report, he violated the Pentagon's security measures. He used a illegal device to communicate and a app on it that was not approved. He got kind of a smackdown on that. Didn't so much on a few other things that probably he should have. But nonetheless, he's already been reprimanded by the Pentagon once for Signalgate, and the articles of impeachment also include for murder and conspiracy to murder and reckless and unlawful mishandling of classified information. We had mentioned before, the classified information is absolutely true. I think you've got him dead to rights to that. The problem, which has been plagued us with Trump when he decided that the toilet was the best place to put the classified and just put it right next to the John and, read it. Yeah, listen, we've all been there. You're on the toilet, and, you realize you're going to be there for a while and you need something to read. You just might as well read about, CIA clandestine operations in Iran. I mean, that's my prefer. You could read People magazine, but let's be honest. So the problem with Trump there was that the idea was he basically controls what's classified and declassified. Now, he delegates that authority out, but essentially the idea is that the authority rests with him. So he could just basically say it's declassified, and it's declassified. So how do you get him for mishandling classified information when he's the one who determines what's classified? The problem is, same thing with Pete Hegseth and anything that's at least classified at the military level. So, while, he did it, clearly, and that's what happened on the Signal chat, because he defines classified, you're unlikely to get him there. Murder, I think he's dead to rights. And that's we're going to lead into our second story in just a minute. But having said that, so right now we have articles of impeachment, and I don't think this has actually happened before, against 2 cabinet members. How likely are either of these to succeed? That depends on how and when they go through, and on a number of factors that we simply are incapable of knowing at this point. There are a number of doctors who are in Congress, and sometimes they're doctors. I forget who the doctor was in the Terry Schiavo case, but if I recall, he was a heart surgeon. He was in Congress. Somebody in the live chat, I'm sure, will remember. And Terry Schiavo was pronounced brain dead, and her husband had ordered that they remove her from, actually the doctor had asked that she be removed from life support because she was taking up valuable resources and she was brain dead. Her husband approved the authorization, and Congress stepped in and said, no, it's murder. And a lot of people got upset about this because they thought that maybe private medical decisions should be left to the individuals, not to the legislative branch of the United States of America. But nonetheless, Congress stepped in, and mostly because there was a heart surgeon in Congress who magically over Zoom was able to determine that she was alive and well. Those were fun times. So there are a number of doctors in Congress, and there are a number of people in Congress who have families and who do believe in science. Sometimes they argue that they don't because they know that's how they get elected, and some of them truly don't believe it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that every MAGA crazy there is faking it, but I strongly suspect there are more Republicans concerned specifically about RFK than one would think just by looking at Congress. And again, we had talked yesterday briefly about the rabies story. Nobody wants to see polio come back. Nobody wants to see rabies come back. Polio, I don't think actually can come back, but nobody wants to see any of that. And it is irrefutable that that is what RFK Jr. is doing. There's already a measles outbreak. I mean, give me a fucking break. People in Congress aren't necessarily the brightest bulbs in the box, but having said that, they can recognize their own self-interest, and RFK Jr. is jeopardizing the health of every American, including their kids, their grandkids, and so on and so forth. Not every Republican on the dais is going to understand that. But we don't need everyone. We need enough to successfully impeach. So while Newsweek is reporting that this is unlikely to succeed, I'm not as convinced. And he has already violated a number of promises that he made. He said he was not going to roll back certain vaccine mandates, just wasn't going to touch them, and he has. So because he is in a position that is actually has to go through the nomination process, and Congress has to agree to let him take the cabinet role that he is now in, because he's violated those violated those promises, there are people who are going to want to impeach him simply on those grounds. I still think it's an uphill battle. I do agree, but I don't think it's, quote, unlikely in the same sense that they say. And I think the tide is starting to turn against the Trump administration, and we'll get into why in just a second. The Hegseth impeachment is still outstanding, and we will see where that goes. It looks like articles of impeachment are about to be dropped on Trump as well. Texas Democrat Al Green says that he plans to file against Donald Trump. We have, or I should say I have, been against this for now, and the reason is you really actually only have one shot at it. He's been impeached so many times that it just looks like, you're randomly firing off shots hoping you hit something. If you don't have him dead to rights, it's not going to work, and you're not going to get another shot at it. So I think his heart is in the right place, and I think his mind is in the right place, too. It's just a question of timing. He has not yet said when he's going to drop those articles of impeachment, but it appears as if it's going to be reasonably soon. That would mean 3 members of the executive branch will be under impeachment proceedings all at the same time. I shouldn't say under impeachment proceedings because the proceedings don't start until the articles pass. So they will have had articles of impeachment dropped in Congress against them. Where they go, we'll see. So, as I said, RFK, I think, is the most vulnerable, and Hegseth is becoming vulnerable rapidly. Our second story is about the boat strikes. Now, this is one where I'd like to, I'm going to pause for a minute. We have retired Commander Lance McMillan on quite frequently, and Lance is actually a friend. We have talked a lot on the phone. We don't get to really meet in person, unfortunately, but he's a really great guy, which I think comes across very well to anybody who watches this show. I think he does these shows because this is my speaking for him, but I think he does these shows because he feels that he is contributing something of value to these programs. He absolutely is. And I don't think he really feels like he needs the credit for it. I think he just likes the fact that he's contributing. Having said that, when the U.S. did a second strike on the boat on September 2nd, a quote, drug smuggling boat, which we'll get into it. The boat was struck by SEAL Team 6 of all units. The boat was struck, split in half, and capsized. There were 2 survivors. A second strike was ordered to kill those survivors. Now, this violates a number of laws. It violates Articles 3 and 4 of the Geneva Conventions. It violates U.S. law, which says that Americans are not allowed to violate the Geneva Conventions. Wildly illegal. And we talked to Commander McMillan about it, and I asked him why this was done. Now, in my view, this was done because this is just sort of our attitude. We're cavalier. And he said, well, because otherwise you're leaving witnesses. And in my view, that was a little cynical. I was just like, wow, okay. It's like, it's like the U.S. has just become an illegal, like, mafia organization, which, to be fair, I think Trump wants to turn it into. I think he sees himself as the Don of some big mafioso, but he's like, yeah, they didn't want witnesses because what they're doing is illegal and they know it. Well, this is why we have Commander on, because he was dead right about that, and I came to realize that very quickly. And we had a similar talk when in mid-October they captured two detainees. Now, keep in mind that the administration has been arguing, and for me, this is the smoking gun. The administration has been arguing that these are narco-terrorists. They represent a clear and present danger, an imminent threat to the United States because they are smuggling poison into the United States with which to kill Americans, the poison being cocaine. Now, or fentanyl. That's the argument. They captured two from this boat alive. What did they do with them? Well, because these are terrorists who are an imminent threat to the United States, they returned them back to their homes so they could re-engage and attack the United States again. That's not a joke. That's what they did. So anybody involved in that decision, as far as I'm concerned, is guilty of treason. Either that or they're lying about their motivations. Again, we spoke to Commander McMillan because I was stunned. I was just like, why did we send him home? He's like, what are you going to do? Have a trial? I was like, yeah. Because I'm the naive little, and he's this is, again, he has to get the credit for this because he's the guy. I learned so much from him. He's like, you cannot try any of these people because if you do, where do you try them? The first place probably is in a military court where they're going to realize this is not a military organization. It's a civilian organization. Then it goes to a civilian court. And then you've got a problem because Trump is lying about all of his defenses for doing this. Trump is abusing his power. He is illegally attacking these boats and he is murdering civilians. But if all the civilians are at the bottom of the ocean, that becomes a lot harder to prove. If they're in a court in New York, now Trump's got a problem. So, in my view, obviously he nailed that 100%. And the fact that we returned, I think, one to Colombia, and the other one I had said previously to Venezuela. It wasn't. It was... I forget where the other one was returned to, but we returned them home. No conditions. We didn't trade them for other enemy combatants. We returned them home. That right there is irrefutable proof that what the government is doing is not engaging in a war, that these are not terrorists, and that they are engaged in illegal strikes that they want nobody to know about. Because if anything that the U.S. government has been telling us about these things were true, they've got the evidence in those two people. You bring them up to a court. What were you doing? We were transporting drugs. Why? Because we wanted to murder as many Americans as possible because we're terrorists. That didn't happen. Why didn't they go to Gitmo? That was the smoking gun, in my view. Having said that, the smoking gun has now been published. The New York Times has put out an article. Now, we have to be clear here, because there were two separate incidents where there were survivors. And in both cases, there were two survivors. So we can get confused. So let's talk about the first one. The first one happened on September 2nd. And there were 11 people on the boat. Now, right off the bat, the fact that there were 11 people on the boat tells you it is not a drug smuggling boat. The reason is because the average male weighs about 200 pounds. Those boats need to travel 1,300 miles, but they have a range of about 200. So they have to load up on two things: cocaine and fuel. Every person adds weight and takes off like $1 million off the profit. So they run at the absolute minimum number they need. We are right now producing a video that we're going to have out hopefully today or tomorrow on how this drug smuggling works, and on the boats that over the last 10 years have been intercepted by the U.S. Coast Guard. And in all of these cases, the boats had maximum 3 people. And there's no need to have any more. These are go-fast boats. They don't engage the Coast Guard. They outrun everybody. The only problem is the Coast Guard has helicopters and they have a hard time outrunning that, so they just try to avoid the helicopters. There were 11 people on this boat. Now, it was not a fishing boat. It wasn't a fishing boat. So the people who are saying it was a fishing boat are doing a huge disservice. And I've gotten into this argument with a number of people on social media, people on the left, people on my team, who sit there and say, oh, he struck a fishing boat. I suspect he is striking fishing boats. We don't know all the boats he's struck. They have been very opaque with this. They have been opaque with Congress. They have not briefed the Gang of Eight until yesterday. And the Gang of Eight walked out saying that leaves us with many more questions than answers. And we're going to get to the New York Times article, which leaves us with even more questions in a minute. That was not a fishing boat. And fishing boats, by the way, same issue. They don't usually exceed 6 people on a fishing boat. They don't need more than 6. And you have to, there's just, the more people you have, the more you got to watch out for, take care of, and, you know, they just get in the way. And it is more weight. Fishing boats, the weight of an individual is a lot less important. But on a go-fast boat, no. So this boat had 11 people. That means it was most likely human trafficking. Now, human trafficking is bad. I am not a fan of human trafficking. But it is a civilian activity. It's not a military one. It's illegal. It's an illegal business. They should all be punished. They should all go to jail. And if the punishment for human trafficking is getting hanged, you know, fine. I'm okay with the capital punishment for human traffickers, but they go to trial. They don't just end up getting blown up on the boat. And by the way, do you know that all 11 on the boat, if this is human trafficking, then that would mean probably 3 on the boat were armed and the rest were victims that just got blown out of the water. The military does not engage civilian targets. Period. End of discussion. How many times have we sat and looked at when the U.S. took a whole bunch of Vietnamese people? Maybe 1 or 2 were VC. The rest were civilians. Just shot and killed them all. That was a war crime. We know that. We knew it then. We didn't do much about it. Now we're not very proud of it. There's a reason we're not proud of it. It's because the Germans did the same thing. We all know a war crime when we see one. So they blew up the boat. It was not a drug trafficking boat. I don't care what anybody says, because you do not put 11 people on a drug trafficking boat that's trying to make it 1,300 miles. You don't do that. They're all just sitting there. I'm like, what are they doing? They're just like, oh, dude, we got lots of cocaine here. It's just, you know, it's going to be a long trip. Really? Okay, so they blow up this boat. 2 survivors. They then call a JAG officer who says, yeah, sure, go ahead, hit it again and kill the survivors. They hit it again, kill the survivors. Now, at some point, somebody in the Pentagon pointed out that this is illegal. The way I know that is since then it appears that they've been, trying to make sure there are no survivors after the first strike. So they've upped the veracity of the first strike, but B, in mid-October, they did another strike where there were 2 survivors, and they actually picked them up. A helicopter came, grabbed them, picked them up, and brought them to the U.S. Now they've got 2 survivors. All right, well, they put them on a ship, which is U.S. territory, I suppose, if it's in the water. At any rate, so we had 2 prisoners from a mid-October strike. They were alive and well. What did we do with them? Well, we know what happened. They were released and sent home. Kind of strange if they're enemy combatants. Very strange if they're enemy combatants. Now, somebody had pointed out that, well, not really, because war hasn't been declared, so they're this quasi area, and as prisoners of war, they don't get prisoner of war status, which is true, but they actually do get humanitarian and Geneva Convention coverage because we're signatories to the Geneva Convention, which applies to everybody we capture, whether they're signatories or not. So, these people had to be treated humanely. They couldn't be just executed. But for some reason, we didn't want them in the court system, so we sent them home, where presumably they got right back on a boat again. My guess is if I was one of them, I'd be like, no, being blown up once was enough, thank you. So maybe they didn't, who knows? But they're terrorists, right? So terrorists don't mind. I'm sure they, The New York Times published an article, Inside the Pentagon's Scramble to Deal with Boat Strike Survivors. Now, again, the headline's a little confusing if you don't realize they're talking about the second incident, which was mid-October, where there were actual survivors that we didn't murder. Okay. Quote, the Pentagon was in a bind. The military had plucked 2 survivors from the Caribbean Sea in mid-October after striking a boat that U.S. officials say were carrying drugs, and the Pentagon needed to figure out what to do with them. Well, put them in Gitmo. We've been dealing with terrorists since 9/11. Do you know what we've been doing with Al-Qaeda and ISIL? I mean, come on. Waterboard them. On a call with counterparts at the State Department, Pentagon lawyers floated an idea. They asked whether the 2 survivors could be put in the notorious prison in El Salvador. So they're just going to send these people to the human rights file. Holy smoke. Oh, my God. To which the Trump administration had sent hundreds of Venezuelan deportees. The State Department lawyers were stunned, one official said, and rejected the idea. The survivors ended up being repatriated to their home countries of Colombia and Ecuador. A little under 2 weeks later, on October 29th, Pentagon officials convened another session about boat strike survivors. So they've realized now that this is an issue. They aren't killing them anymore, probably because they figured out that they could all end up in jail. And this is probably why they're being so cagey, which means there's been likely other survivors. These are all recorded, and while all of these recordings are top secret, there's been leaks from the Pentagon, so they know some information is getting out because we already knew about the second strike on the and roughly how it was ordered. There were some inaccuracies, but somebody had reported this. I think it was to the Washington Post covered this. So they know they're being watched by their own people who are leaking this, and thank God. So. 2 weeks later, October 29th, Pentagon officials convened another session about the boat strike survivors, a video conference involving dozens of American diplomats from across the Western Hemisphere. And the message was that any rescued survivors needed to be sent back to their home country or to a third country, said 3 officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity. So they have 3 sources for this, probably diplomats who were in on the call. Behind this policy was a quieter goal to ensure that survivors did not end up in the U.S. judicial system, where the court case could force the administration to show evidence President Trump's military campaign, evidence justifying Trump's military campaign in the region. Keep in mind, so far, he's made a lot of claims about these boats, and he has said that the evidence is so clear that it justifies calling them military targets and destroying them and killing the survivors. And he hasn't shown anybody any of this evidence, including people with classified clearance at the Pentagon, not the Pentagon, in Congress. I remember when January 6th happened, and somebody had stolen Nancy Pelosi's desktop or laptop, and I'm sitting there going, do you realize what the hell you've just done? Because Nancy Pelosi seems kind of annoying to me. I've always found her a little annoying and very competent. But she's not just a member of Congress. It's not just a congressman you're dealing with. She's third in the line of succession, which means that she is looped in on classified information in case something happens to the president and vice president. She's also in the Gang of Eight, which means she has the highest security clearance possible short of the president of the United States. She has higher security clearance than the vice president. She has higher security clear, and all that's on her computer. So if you take her computer, you are taking one of the most classified. Oh dear, that was not a good move. January 6th, again, it's either laugh or cry. These people, and then somebody decided to take a dump on her desk, which, maybe what happened was they said, I'm in Mar-a-Lago, and when I see classified information, I naturally, because that's where Trump put okay, we're going to abandon that line of reasoning. Anyways, this previously unreported calls demonstrate the haphazard and sometimes tense nature of the process within the Trump administration to weigh what to do with survivors of the U.S. attacks on boats that the military asserts, without presenting evidence, are drug smuggling vessels posing an immediate threat to Americans. So at this point, the New York Times is reporting that they have been repeatedly trying to figure out how to keep them out of the American judicial system and have decided to send them home. The only possible reason is because Trump cannot defend in any court what he's doing, and he knows it. There's no other reason to be sending these people back, because if Trump's assertions are correct, then these people are terrorists who should be held at Gitmo or some other location. But because this country has laws, they're entitled to a defense. And as soon as a defense attorney talks to them, I think some ugly truths about this administration and what this country has been doing is going to come out. So they're not letting that happen. These talks took place after the first attack on September 2nd, when the U.S. military killed 2 survivors of the second strike. Pentagon officials have not fully explained the process for handling survivors to other agents in Congress, even as the campaign has continued, killing at least 87 people in 22 attacks. Actually, I think it's more than 80. I think it's like 90 something, but at any rate. The very act of sending survivors to other countries, as this administration did in the attack in mid-October, raises a fundamental question about the administration's premise for the strikes. If the administration has evidence to show the people on the targeted boats are smuggling drugs and are a threat to Americans, then why are they not putting survivors on trial in the United States? Yeah. That's a really good question that we've been asking for a couple of weeks now. Now, would also like to point out something else, which who cares? I mean, at this point, it appears people aren't even agreeing on the fundamentals of reality. What boats are they blowing up? According to them, drug boats, and they're saving millions of lives. Except, while Venezuela produces a decent amount of cocaine, 90% of their cocaine goes to the EU. 90% goes to the EU. Only 10% goes to the U.S. The central reason for this is because the U.S. Coast Guard is so good at interdicting this stuff that getting it through by water is actually really hard. Even the go-fast boats will outpace anything that the U.S. Coast Guard has, because the U.S. Coast Guard boats, while speed is a factor, they're also armored and have, these are boats that are ready for combat. The go-fast boats aren't. Go-fast boats, and that's the other thing you have to remember. They're blowing up boats that have no weapons, no armor. They're made of plastic because plastic floats better and they can go faster. What they care about is the minimum weight possible. These are unarmed civilian boats. These aren't military boats. When they get anywhere near the U.S., yes, they outrun the Coast Guard. but they can't outrun the Coast Guard helicopters, which can shoot out the engines. And that's what they usually do. They arrest everybody, who then, by the way, gets to go to jail and have a trial. At any rate, for that reason, Venezuela tends to send them much further to the EU, where it's easier to smuggle in by water, by the ocean. 10% of all of the cocaine in the United States comes from Venezuela. 10% smuggled in to Venezuela. So Trump is blowing up these boats to save Americans from 10%. Where does the rest come from? One source, Mexico. Mexico represents 90% of all of the cocaine in the U.S. How do they get it in? They smuggle it in by land. That's how 90% of cocaine gets into the United States. How about fentanyl? That's the one they've been talking about. It's far more deadly. Mexico is also the dominant source of illegal fentanyl in the United States. They produce the vast majority of the drug. Let's see, based on recent seizures, almost all of the fentanyl intercepted, 96% of all of the fentanyl intercepted on its way into the United States was intercepted at the southern border with Mexico. 96%, not in the water. The southern border with Mexico. They smuggle it in cars. They smuggle it in people. No, don't ask how they do that. Use your imagination. Don't use your imagination. Moving on. Data indicates that approximately 98.9% of the total fentanyl seized by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol in 2023 was at the southern border. But because I don't want to be too derogatory here, but I mean, are Trump supporters just allergic to reality or numbers? Canada said they're going to stop the flow of fentanyl from that border into the U.S. I think it was a total of 63 pounds of fentanyl were seized at the Canadian border in 1 year. 63. You know how many pounds of cocaine one of those go-fast boats hold on average? 2,000. 2,000. That's also why each man is important. If the average human male is 200 pounds, that means for every man you have on board, you lose 10% of the cocaine that you can hold. They had 11 men on that boat. Do the math. They weren't going to the U.S., and they didn't have cocaine. And they know that. That's why they had to kill the remaining 2 survivors. One scenario, the 2 survivors were human traffickers, in which case you don't want it getting out that it's a bunch of civilian human traffickers you're killing. Worst case scenario, 2 victims, 2 kidnapped victims who were kidnapped by human traffickers. That now you have to kill them. You have to kill them. Because otherwise they're going to talk and say, yeah, there were 6 or 7 other innocent civilians on that boat that they just blew up. So yeah, if they're civilians, you need to kill them. That's what we're dealing with here. And that brings it back around to the charges of murder against Pete Hegseth. Now, as I said earlier, on the impeachment of RFK Jr., which dropped today, I think that's got a better shot than Newsweek appears to think it does. And the reason is because Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's been a lot of question as to whether she's really as crazy as she looks, and it appears like she's not. 𝐒𝐚𝐦 has said that he's seen footage of her prepping for interviews, and she actually just talks and acts like a normal human being, and then she just goes off the rails when the interview starts, and that she's really going to her base, she's going to MAGA, and everything that she does is a hugely cynical act. I have a hard time seeing cynicism. We just sort of talked about that earlier. That's why Commander McMillan is. I love it because he sees it when I don't. So I have a hard time believing that, but the more and more I see of what happened with the Epstein files and everything else, the more I think, yeah, Xander probably called that one right. She's got family, and that's one reason the Epstein files have turned out to be important to her enough that it's going to be what ends her career in Congress. Her career in Congress is over. She knows it. She's not even running again. But she made that decision only after it was made clear how much she pissed off Trump, and she knew that that was a possibility when she decided to take a stand on the Epstein files. So she did. Doesn't make her a good person, but Jesus, when push comes to shove, she does care about a few things more than her career. I'm betting RFK Jr. is one of them. And the destruction that he's causing to people in her district, including her family, who's probably all vaccinated. Yeah, I think there's going to be a number of people who we think are a little on the kookaloo side who are going to come around for the RFK impeachment. And with this article from the New York Times, it's crystal clear that the Pentagon has been trying to figure out how to justify what it's going to do with people, and in the interim is murdering everybody so it doesn't have the unfortunate problem of survivors. If this is a war like they claim, these are war crimes. If not, these are crimes against humanity. Pick. There's no third option. And Hegseth is the man at the top, but for one thing, which is he's made it clear whatever Trump wants him to do, he's going to do. He's implementing the Trump agenda, the Trump perspective. That's what he's doing. That's when you drop the impeachment on Trump. We'll see. So, believe it or not, it all ties together. Yeah, bring that around to a nice little circle. That's why they pay me whatever you guys decide to super chat, which we, and I in particular, greatly appreciate. So I'm going to check the live chat real quick, and I think I covered everything. It's a lot, but the New York Times article is, in my view, we've already had the smoking gun. When they returned two people back to their country of origin, that's it. Game over. Because if those are terrorists, you just committed an act of treason by letting two terrorists go. If they're not terrorists, then you're avoiding them going to a judicial system that will reach that conclusion, and that means every strike you've done is against civilian targets. Either way, they released two. It's done. We've had the smoking gun for a while, but, and again, I like the way the New York Times did point that out. Why are you releasing these people? If what you say is true, that's the dumbest. So now they just have to kill them all. We are in a dark place in this country right now. It's truly insane. All right. Yes, I've been completely avoiding the live chat, and that's just because I need to. It's a lot to keep in mind. So, for those of you just joining us, articles of impeachment against RFK Jr. have dropped for abandoning his charge to protect the health and welfare of every American citizen. While you and I both know that that is patently obvious, getting Congress on board, especially when it's controlled by Republicans, may be a bit of a challenge. And I do think it's going to have its challenges. But having said that, I also think that there are enough congressmen who are tethered to reality. I know I'm naive and little doe-eyed optimism there, but I think there are enough congressmen tethered to reality to realize that this man is causing a great deal of damage to the U.S. And Commander McMillan has pointed out another reason why Republicans in charge, not including Trump, but at the Heritage Foundation, high-end Republicans, would want to start dismantling Trump's cabinet right now. And if they have a say or any sway with any members of the Republican caucus, they'll probably say, yeah, get rid of him, because they know he's crazy. And electing a crazy cabinet works great when you've got Trump in office, but Trump isn't going to be in office forever, and he's showing signs of wear rapidly. So they have to start looking towards their next step, and it isn't going to be Trump, and it isn't going to be with an incompetent cabinet, because the incompetent cabinet can't complete your agenda. So I think there's going to be pressure from surprise Republicans, and sometimes with completely silly excuses, but they'll be on behalf of the Heritage Foundation, and they'll just say, yeah, we're done. So there's a decent possibility this is going to work, I think, against RFK. Against Hegseth, Hegseth is far more insulated and protected than RFK for obvious reasons. Having said that, this boat scandal is not only spiraling out of control, but the fact that they had, what was it they said? Like, was it 12? A large number of diplomats on a call trying to say, how do we deal with these guys without putting them through the American court system? They've already admitted it. They've given up the bowl game. That's it. It's over. Anybody who reads this knows exactly what they're doing. This New York Times story is going to spread, I suspect, like wildfire. The Democrats are going to hold on to this. This is almost as big as the Epstein files. It is as much proof as you can get until we hear from someone inside admitting it, that they're committing acts of murder. And the Democrats know this, so the Democrats aren't letting go of this. So between this and the Epstein files, I think we're seeing the administration in a huge amount of trouble. Somebody pointed out piracy. Yeah, I'd seen somebody arguing piracy before, and one of the interesting things is people seem to think, okay, pirates, you get to kill them all. No, you don't. You don't. You get to blow up the boat, but if there are survivors, you have to take them on board and you have to treat them humanely. Both the laws of the sea and the Geneva Conventions say that. So, and I think, what is it, the National Convention on Human Rights, I forget what it is. You're not allowed to. The reality is, there is no set of circumstances under which you're just allowed to take somebody who has no defenses, who's helpless, no way of, and shoot and kill them. It doesn't matter who they are or what they've done. There has to be some kind of process, and there isn't a convention or pact anywhere that's recognized in the Western Hemisphere that permits that. There isn't. And it's a fucking joke that people even try to make that argument. Oh, well, if they're pirates. Yeah, if they're pirates, you still got to pick up the survivors. You're not allowed to murder pirates. You're allowed to kill them in self-defense. Yeah. Murder is murder. I can't believe I have to explain to some people what murder is. Not that, by the way, Michaels wasn't defending or arguing. I am passing on a frustration from an argument I had a couple of days ago where somebody said, well, they're pirates and so you can kill them all. No, you can't. What? This is from the same group that got pissed off when Obama killed an enemy combatant who wasn't in combat at the time and who happened to be an American citizen, but was openly and admittedly fighting for Al-Qaeda. He didn't like the U.S., switched sides. When Obama does it, well, obviously there had to be due process. When Trump murders a whole bunch of people, All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Our next official scheduled program is tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern, with Commander Lance McMillan. I'll be very curious to see what he has to say about this New York Times article. My suspicion is we're going to hear a lot more about it, in the same way that the Washington Post article about the two survivors kind of just mushroomed and everybody was like, oh, wait a minute, this kind of changes everything. This is going to be even bigger, and I think this is going to be a big thing. So come on in, join us on the Discord. We're going to be continuing. Anyone who has any discussions or questions about the impeachment process or anything like that, we can discuss them, and we already have threads discussing them on the Discord and all of our other topics. So I hope you guys will join us down there. And in the meantime, I hope everyone here has a marvelous rest of your day and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern for Downtime with Commander Lance McMillan. Have a good day all.